Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Mr.Night-Terror. In the shadows of the night, where darkness dances with fear, welcome to a world of chilling tales that will haunt your dreams and send shivers down your spine. Subscribe to my channel and join me as we embark on this haunting adventure together. But beware, once you enter this realm, there's no turning back. Patrick stepped inside from the hot Florida sun into the furniture store for his first day of work. The heavy wooden doors creaked and moaned as he opened them. His tall frame cast an elongated shadow on the worn floorboards, and his short-cropped brown hair did little to hide the curiosity that glinted in his eyes. Despite the impressive black beard adorning his face and muscular build, there was a quiet vulnerability about him that made him seem approachable. "Here goes nothing," Patrick muttered under his breath as he took a moment to survey his new workplace. The atmosphere inside the store was eerie, to say the least. A dim, flickering light cast a sickly pallor over the room, making it difficult to see the full extent of the space. The creaking floorboards groaned beneath Patrick's feet, as if protesting the weight of his presence. Patrick shivered involuntarily, trying to shake the unsettling feeling that had settled over him. "It's just a store," he reminded himself, attempting to refocus on the task at hand. But try as he might, the peculiar ambience seemed to cling to him like a second skin, refusing to be ignored. He took a deep breath and ventured further into the store, determined not to let the strange atmosphere get the better of him. Besides, he had always been fascinated by the supernatural, as he heard rumors that the store was haunted. Perhaps this job would offer him more than just a paycheck. As Patrick delved deeper into the dimly lit store, he soon found his manager, Gary, waiting for him among the towering stacks of antique furniture. Gary's portly frame and graying hair made him look like a seasoned professional who had seen it all. With a warm smile, he extended his hand to Patrick. "Ah, you must be Patrick," he said as they shook hands. "Welcome aboard. I'm Gary, your manager. Let me give you a quick tour." "Thanks," Patrick replied, curiosity burning in his eyes. "This place seems interesting." "Interesting is one way to put it," Gary chuckled, leading Patrick through a maze of ornate wooden armoires, velvet chaise lounges, and creaking rocking chairs. As they walked, Patrick couldn't help but notice the peculiarities of the store. The flickering shadows that seemed to dance behind the furniture, the humming from the air conditioner sounded like whispers echoing from the corners, and the inexplicable sense of being watched. "Over here," Gary gestured towards a dusty Victorian sofa, "is where we keep some of our larger pieces. And down this aisle you'll find an assortment of dining sets and cabinets." He paused, studying Patrick's face. "You're taking it all in pretty well. Most new employees are more rattled by now." Patrick shrugged, trying to maintain his composure. "I've always been fascinated by the supernatural. Besides, I like a good challenge." "Supernatural, huh?" Gary raised an eyebrow, leaning on a nearby table. "Well, this place certainly has its fair share of strange occurrences that could possibly be considered supernatural. But it's an old store, not a haunted mansion. But remember, we're here to sell furniture, not chase ghosts," Gary said with a chuckle. "Of course," Patrick agreed, though he couldn't help feeling drawn to the mysteries around him. Gary continued to show Patrick around, and let him get settled in by showing him the break room and his locker where he could store his personal belongings. Gary said you can take your breaks as time allows, but there must always be someone on the sales floor at all times. It will be up to you and the others to coordinate your breaks. But remember to keep focused on your work, Gary reminded him as they concluded the tour. And don't let anything distract you. Just keep busy and you'll be just fine here. "Sure thing, Gary," Patrick replied, trying to sound confident. But as he followed his manager back to the front of the store, he couldn't help but feel excitement about what just may lay ahead. As Patrick stood at the front of the store, a young woman approached him. Her long blonde hair cascaded down her shoulders, framing bright blue eyes that sparkled with warmth. She offered him a friendly smile as she extended her hand in greeting. "Hi, I'm Natalie," she said, her voice soft and melodious. "I work here too. Gary told me it's your first day, so I thought I'd come say hi and help you get settled in." "Hi, Natalie," Patrick replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I'm Patrick, It's nice to meet you." "Great to meet you too," Natalie exclaimed. "This place can be a little overwhelming at first, but don't worry. I'll show you the ropes." "Thanks, I appreciate that," Patrick said, grateful for the offer. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this furniture store than met the eye, and he hoped Natalie might shed some light about the rumors of this store being haunted. As they walked through the dimly lit aisles, the floorboards creaking beneath their feet, Natalie began to share some of the store's history. "Did you know this place has quite a past?" she asked, glancing around at the antique furniture that surrounded them. "There have been several tragic deaths here over the years, and some people even say it's haunted." "Yeah, I heard that this place was haunted," Patrick said, trying to maintain a skeptical tone despite his growing fascination. "Yep," Natalie nodded, "but I wouldn't worry about it too much. We all experience strange things here from time to time, but nothing truly harmful has happened, at least not recently." Patrick frowned, struck by an uneasy curiosity. "What kind of strange things?" "Well," Natalie began, her eyes distant as she recalled past events. "Sometimes you'll hear whispers when no one else is around or see objects move on their own. It's pretty unnerving, but we've all learned to live with it." "Wow," Patrick muttered, his mind racing at the thought of working amidst such supernatural activity. He glanced around the store, suddenly aware of the faint scent of decay that seemed to permeate the air. "Try not to let it get to you," Natalie advised, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Just focus on your work and remember, we're all in this together." "Thanks, Natalie," Patrick said, forcing a smile despite the cold breeze that seemed to brush against his neck. As they continued their tour, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement, curiosity, and unease about what lay ahead at this new job. Patrick nodded, his skepticism evident in the tightness of his jaw. "So, this store is haunted and everyone just accepts it?" "More or less," Natalie replied with a shrug, her casual demeanor contrasting with the gravity of her words. "All right then," Patrick said, trying to sound nonchalant as he adjusted the collar of his shirt. He couldn't deny that the eerie atmosphere was starting to affect him, but he refused to be deterred by mere rumors. As they continued exploring the store, Patrick found himself drawn to an old grandfather clock tucked into a dim corner. The hands were frozen in place, its pendulum motionless, yet he could have sworn he heard faint ticking echoing through the musty air. "Hey, Natalie," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Does this clock ever work?" "Only when it wants to," she answered cryptically, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Very funny," Patrick grumbled, rolling his eyes. But even as he tried to dismiss the idea, his fascination with the unexplained grew even stronger. He couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to the haunting rumors after all. No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than he noticed a peculiar sight. A rocking chair near the back wall had begun to sway, its creaking rhythm filling the silence like a discordant melody. There was no draft, besides the AC, but there was no way it would cause the chair to rock. No apparent cause for the movement. It simply rocked, as though propelled by invisible hands. "Okay, that's odd," Patrick muttered, his pulse quickening as he glanced around for any sign of trickery. But there was nothing. No strings, no hidden mechanism. Only the relentless rocking that seemed to mock his disbelief. "Welcome to the haunted furniture store," Natalie quipped, amusement dancing in her eyes. "You get used to it," she said with a mocking chuckle while trying to sound scary. "Very funny, Natalie." "Yeah, right," Patrick breathed, his skepticism wavering in the face of such inexplicable phenomena. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the whispers, the scent of decay, and the chilling realization that there was more to this store than meets the eye. Gary approached Patrick with his usual confident stride, a knowing smile on his face. "So, getting settled in? If you have any questions, Pat, don't hesitate to ask. My door is always open. You can start by assembling the bookshelves in the warehouse that arrived this morning. Should only take a few hours. Then if you have time, you could assemble some tables and move them into the display area. The warehouse is your baby now. You'll find all the tools you'll need in the toolboxes by your workbench." "All right," Patrick agreed, walking towards the back of the store, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to focus on his task at hand, See? It's not so bad, he muttered to himself, forcing a laugh as he moved along the creaking floorboards. Yet despite his attempts at nonchalance, every creak and groan seemed to echo louder than before, the shadows cast by the dim overhead light taking on sinister shapes in the corners of his vision. "Hello?" Patrick called out, his voice barely audible against the low hum of the air conditioning. The cold breeze that brushed against his neck sent a shiver down his spine, and he couldn't shake the nagging sensation of being watched. "Focus," he urged himself, gritting his teeth as he continued to look around the warehouse to get familiar. He tried to ignore the whispers that seemed to float through the air, words that danced just beyond the edge of comprehension. But no matter how hard he tried to concentrate on his job, the feeling of unease persisted, like an itch he couldn't quite reach. "Everything okay back there?" Gary's voice rang out from the front of the store, pulling Patrick from his spiraling thoughts. Yeah, I'm good," Patrick replied, forcing a smile onto his face as he continued to work. He knew that Gary was right. He had a job to do, and he couldn't afford to let the strange occurrences hold him back. But even as he tried to focus on assembling the bookshelves, he felt vulnerable in his isolation inside the warehouse. "Is this really what I signed up for?" he wondered, his curiosity and fear warring with the pragmatism that had always guided him. But as the whispers grew louder and the shadows began to dance, the question remained unanswered, leaving Patrick with only one certainty. This job would be anything but ordinary. The store's ancient grandfather clock struck 6, its deep chime resonating throughout the dimly lit space. Patrick wiped the sweat from his brow with a tired sigh. He began to collect the tools and put them away. Then he cleaned the mess he made, from the boxes that the shelves and tables came in. He then brought the tables he assembled to the display area of the store. "Closing time," Natalie announced, her voice both friendly and weary. "How was your first day, Patrick?" "Interesting," Patrick replied, his voice betraying a hint of trepidation. He hesitated, then added, "I can't say it was like any other job I've had before." Natalie chuckled as she locked the front door, the deadbolt sliding into place with a resounding click. "Yeah, it's definitely not your average furniture store." As they walked through the darkened showroom, Patrick couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But there was only silence and darkness, the strange happenings of the day seemingly dormant, at least for now. "Are you up for grabbing some dinner?" Natalie asked, pulling him from his thoughts. "There's a great little diner just down the street." "Sure," Patrick agreed, eager for the chance to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the store. As they made their way down the creaking stairs and out into the cool night air, he found himself grateful for Natalie's presence. She was a beacon of normalcy in this eerie new world he'd stumbled into. Over steaming cups of coffee and plates of hot food, Patrick shared his thoughts about the day, recounting the strange occurrences he had witnessed. Natalie listened intently, nodding in understanding as he described the whispers and the unexplained movements. "Everyone who works here has had their own share of strange experiences," she admitted. "But we learn to live with it, and sometimes even embrace it." "Embrace it?" Patrick asked, curiosity piqued. "Sure. It's like living on the edge of a mystery, always wondering what's going to happen next." As they walked back to their cars after dinner, Patrick found himself reflecting on Natalie's words. The haunted furniture store was indeed a place where excitement, curiosity, and unease intertwined, creating an atmosphere that was both thrilling and terrifying. And despite his initial reservations, he couldn't deny that the supernatural events had ignited a spark within him that refused to be extinguished. "See you tomorrow, Patrick," Natalie called out as she climbed into her car. "Get some rest. You're going to need it." "Thanks, I will," he replied, watching her drive away before turning to his own vehicle. As he started the engine and pulled onto the street, his thoughts turned to the haunted store and the mysteries that awaited him there. And while fear still clung to the edges of his mind, it was tempered by a growing sense of anticipation. For whatever lay ahead in the shadows of the ancient building, he knew he was ready to face it. The clock on the wall ticked away, its hands inching to 6 p.m. Patrick sat hunched at his desk in the warehouse office, writing his daily warehouse report to close out the day. The room was cluttered, Stacks of papers teetered precariously on every surface, and empty coffee cups had begun to form a fortress around his workspace. "Come on," he said in resignation, as he spilt some coffee on his shirt. He wiped up the mess with a shop rag. He then took another sip from his lukewarm cup of coffee. As he did so, a shiver ran down his spine, an involuntary response to something he couldn't quite place. He shook off the feeling and continued typing, determined to meet his deadline. As the moments wore on, Patrick began to notice faint whispers and shadows flickering at the edge of his vision. He furrowed his brow, torn between his pragmatic nature and a hidden curiosity for the supernatural. "It's just fatigue," he reassured himself, trying to push the eerie sensations to the back of his mind. Despite his resolution to focus solely on his work, Patrick found himself pausing now and then, his ears straining to catch the whispers that seemed to be growing louder. "I'm losing it," he thought, rubbing his eyes as if doing so would erase the shadows and the disembodied voices. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, tension mounting as he struggled to concentrate on the words on the screen. But the more he attempted to ignore the strange occurrences, the more they seemed to demand his attention. It was as if they were calling to him, urging him to delve deeper into the unknown. "Maybe I am losing it," Patrick thought, his heart rate quickening as he tried to brush off the unsettling sensations. He took another sip of his coffee, hoping the caffeine would clear his mind and allow him to focus on the task at hand. But the whispers persisted, growing louder still, and the shadows danced around him like predators circling their prey. As much as Patrick wanted to dismiss them as figments of his tired imagination, he couldn't help but feel that they held some deeper meaning, one that he was compelled to uncover. Patrick's eyes darted from the computer screen to the dimly lit corners of the office. The whispers seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, their haunting tones growing more persistent with each passing moment. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the eerie sensation creeping up his spine. "Hello?" Patrick called out hesitantly, his voice trembling slightly. Is anyone there?" The only response was an icy gust that swept through the room, causing him to shiver involuntarily. As the temperature plummeted, an overwhelming feeling of being watched settled over him like a suffocating shroud. Swallowing hard, he tried to calm his racing thoughts, reminding himself that he was alone in the office. "Get a grip, Patrick," he muttered under his breath, attempting to refocus on his work. But his hands shook as he typed, and every creak and groan of the old building seemed amplified, fueling his mounting terror. Maybe it's just the wind," he reasoned aloud, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. "Or the pipes. Yeah, gotta be the pipes." But deep down, Patrick knew it was neither wind nor pipes that caused the whispers and shadows plaguing his solitude. He could no longer deny the inexplicable dread that had taken hold of him, the certainty that something sinister lurked within these walls. "Who's there?" he demanded, rising from his chair and stepping cautiously toward the source of the whispers. "Show yourself. Is that you, Natalie?" For a brief moment the shadows stilled, and the whispers fell silent. Then, without warning, they resumed with renewed intensity, their chilling murmurs weaving into a cacophony of voices that threatened to overwhelm Patrick's fragile resolve. "Stop it!" he shouted, his fear giving way to anger. "Leave me alone. I'm not afraid of you." As the words left his lips, the shadows darted across his vision once more, leaving him with an unsettling feeling that he had just issued a challenge, one that would soon be met with a response far more terrifying than whispers and shadows. Patrick shook his head, unafraid by the happenings going on around him. There was a faint knock on his door. The door creaked open, and Gary entered the dimly lit office. Patrick could see the amusement on his supervisor's face as he approached the desk littered with papers and empty coffee cups. "You know, Patrick," Gary began, "I gotta say I'm impressed with how you're handling all this weird stuff going on around here. Most folks would have been out the door by now." Patrick paused, looking at Gary with a mixture of pride and determination. "Well, I've always been curious about the supernatural, but I never really believed it could affect me like this. I guess I need to prove to myself that I can handle it." Gary chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a rare breed, that's for sure. But while we're talking about handling things, I know our deadlines are important, but have you ever thought about working somewhere else? Somewhere that might challenge you in different ways? Patrick raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Before I came to work here, I used to work at a cemetery, Gary said, his voice dropping slightly as if sharing a secret. The pay was good, but the work was hard. Casting and digging burial sites isn't for everyone, but I think you'd be a natural at it. If you're interested, I could put in a word for you with my old boss, Bill. Digging graves, huh? Patrick mused, weighing the offer in his mind. The idea of working outdoors, away from haunted offices and spectral whispers, had its appeal. And with his physical strength, he knew he could handle the labor. All right, Gary, set it up. Let's see where this path takes me. Great, Gary said, clapping him on the back. I'll give Bill a call tomorrow. You won't regret it, Patrick. But I sure will miss having a guy like you here. I mean no offense of what I'm about to say, but you just don't seem happy here. And I believe one must be happy at their job to be at their best. Don't get me wrong, though. You did outstanding work, and you helped me with getting this warehouse back to its former glory. So I just wanted to do you a solid in return. I'll call Bill tonight when I get home and set you up with him. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. I look forward to meeting him. Anytime, kid, Gary replied. And then he was gone, leaving Patrick in his office. A smile surfaced on his face as he finished up his work. He then collected his things and then locked up and left the store. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the gravel lot as Patrick arrived at the precast concrete burial vault company. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, trying to dispel the lingering unease from the haunted store he had just left behind. This new opportunity seemed like a lifeline, and he was determined to embrace it wholeheartedly. Patrick, Gary called out jovially, waving him over to where he stood beside a burly man with a thick beard and bald head. Glad you could make it. I'd like you to meet Bill, the owner. Nice to meet you, Patrick, Bill said, extending a calloused hand for a firm handshake. Patrick immediately sensed the no-nonsense attitude beneath Bill's gruff exterior. Likewise, Patrick replied, nodding in acknowledgement. Let me show you around, Bill offered, gesturing for them to follow him into the massive facility. As they walked through the labyrinth of hallways lined with precast concrete vaults, Bill explained the processes involved in the funeral industry. Patrick couldn't help but marvel at the scale of the operation, feeling a sense of awe as he took in the rows upon rows of burial vaults, awaiting their final occupants. Over here we have our standard burial vaults, Bill said, pointing to an area filled with the traditional rectangular concrete slabs. These are reinforced and sealed to ensure they can withstand the test of time. Gary chimed in, adding, I've worked with these for years, and let me tell you, the craftsmanship is second to none. Thanks, Gary, Bill said with a hint of pride in his voice. We take our work seriously here. People trust us to provide a secure resting place for their loved ones, and we don't take that lightly. As they moved further into the facility, Patrick noticed a row of intricately designed vaults, their surfaces adorned with elaborate patterns and symbols. He felt a shiver down his spine, the eerie designs reminding him of the supernatural events he had recently experienced. He quickly pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on Bill's explanation. Over here we have our premium line of burial vaults. These are custom-made to order, allowing families to choose the design and style that best represents their loved one. As they completed the tour, Patrick couldn't help but feel grateful for Gary's recommendation and the opportunity to leave the haunted store behind. He knew this new chapter in his life would not be without its challenges, but he was confident that with the guidance of Gary and Bill, he could face them head-on. Thanks for showing me around, Patrick said sincerely. I'm really excited about the possibility of working here. Gary speaks highly of you, Bill replied, offering a rare smile. We'll discuss the details further, but I think you'd make a great addition to our team. The cold air of the facility nipped at Patrick's skin, sending a shiver down his spine. He rubbed his arms to generate some warmth as he gazed at the vaults surrounding him, marveling at the precision and craftsmanship that went into each one. His curiosity piqued. He turned to Bill and asked, How long does it take to make one of these vaults? And what kind of materials do you use? Bill leaned against a nearby work table, folding his arms across his broad chest. Well, the time it takes varies depending on the design and customization. but on average, it takes about 2 days to create a basic vault. As for materials, we mostly use precast concrete reinforced with rebar. Patrick nodded, running his fingers along the smooth surface of a nearby vault. The cool touch of the concrete sent another chill through his body, reminding him of the supernatural events he had recently experienced. He quickly pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. Have you ever encountered any unusual requests or challenges in this line of work? Patrick asked hesitantly, hoping to gain insight into the darker aspects of the funeral industry without delving too deep into his own fears. Bill smirked, seemingly unfazed by the question. Oh, we've had our fair share of odd requests over the years. One time, a family requested a vault with an intricately carved scene depicting their loved one's favorite hobby, skydiving. Another time, someone insisted on a vault designed to resemble an Egyptian sarcophagus, complete with hieroglyphics. He paused, the smirk fading from his face as he continued. But the most challenging aspect of this job is dealing with the raw emotions of grieving families. You never get used to seeing people in so much pain. We do our best to provide a sense of security and peace for them during such a difficult time, and that's what makes this work so rewarding. As Bill spoke, Patrick could see the sincerity in his eyes. He knew that despite the gruff exterior, Bill was passionate about his work and genuinely cared for the families he served. Thanks for sharing that with me, Patrick said, genuinely appreciative of the insight. I can only imagine how tough it must be, but I'm really looking forward to learning more about this industry and helping people find solace in their darkest moments. Good, Bill replied, nodding approvingly. That's the kind of attitude we need around here. Now let's get back to discussing your potential role at the company. The air in the burial vault company was heavy with the smell of damp concrete and fresh earth. As Patrick stood beside Gary and Bill, the dim, flickering light from the overhead bulbs cast eerie shadows on the rows of massive vaults that lined the walls. As the hum of distant machinery filled his ears, Patrick couldn't help but feel both awed and unsettled by the scale and purpose of the place. Gary, Patrick said, turning to his mentor with a grateful smile, I really appreciate you recommending me for this opportunity. I know working here won't be easy, but it's something I truly want to do. Patrick, Gary replied, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've shown resilience and determination during your time at the store. Those qualities will serve you well here. I believe in you, and I'm confident that you'll succeed in this new role. Thanks, Patrick said, touched by Gary's confidence in him. That means a lot to me. All right then, Bill interjected gruffly, folding his arms across his chest. Let's talk about what you'd be doing here, should you decide to accept our offer. An offer? Patrick asked, his curiosity piqued. Sure, Bill replied, his tone serious. We're always looking for dedicated people who can handle the demands of this job. The responsibilities would include helping with the construction and placement of burial vaults, assisting families with their choices, and coordinating with funeral homes. Sounds like tough work, Patrick mused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Indeed, Bill agreed. And let me be clear, it's not just physically demanding. There's an emotional toll, too. You'll need to be empathetic and respectful when dealing with grieving families. Understood. Patrick nodded solemnly. Should you accept the position, we'll provide you with a thorough training program. You'll shadow experienced employees, learn about the different materials and processes used in creating the vaults, and familiarize yourself with the ins and outs of our operation. Sounds like a solid training plan, Patrick noted, impressed by the thought that had gone into it. Good, Bill said, his eyes narrowing as he studied Patrick closely. Now take some time to think about it. This is a serious decision, and you should be sure you're ready for the challenges ahead. Thank you, sir, Patrick responded, his heart racing from both excitement and nerves. He knew this was a life-changing opportunity, one that could help him grow professionally while providing a sense of purpose and satisfaction. But the weight of the decision still loomed over him, as he pondered the potential implications on his life and his own emotional well-being. The monetary aspect of this job would more than double his pay as well. Patrick's gaze drifted to the rows of burial vaults, their cold, imposing forms casting eerie shadows on the factory floor. He could feel the weight of his decision, as if the spirits from the haunted store were whispering in his ear, urging him to take the leap. His heart pounded, a mix of trepidation and excitement, as he drew in a deep breath and turned to face Bill. "Thank you for offering me this opportunity," Patrick said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions within him. "I accept." Bill's stern expression softened into a genuine smile, and he extended his hand to Patrick. "Welcome aboard, Patrick. I believe you'll be a great addition to our team." "Thank you," Patrick replied, shaking his hand firmly. As their hands met, he felt a surge of determination course through him, as if the supernatural forces that had been plaguing him were now propelling him forward. Gary, who had been observing the exchange with a knowing glint in his eye, stepped forward and clapped Patrick on the back. "I knew you'd make the right choice, my boy. This is a new beginning for you, one where you can leave those strange occurrences behind and focus on building a future in the funeral industry." "Thanks, Gary." Patrick couldn't help but feel grateful for the man who had introduced him to this world and for his unwavering support. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." "Ah, don't mention it." Gary waved off the praise, a hint of a blush creeping up his cheeks. "Just remember that I'm always here for you, whether it's to offer advice or lend an ear when things get tough. We're in this together, Patrick." Patrick nodded, touched by Gary's reassurance. He knew that embarking on this new chapter wouldn't be easy, but with Gary by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "All right," Bill clapped his hands together, drawing their attention back to him. "Let's not waste any more time. We've got a lot of work to do, and I'm eager to see what you're capable of, Patrick." "Me too," Patrick agreed, feeling the fire of determination ignite within him. He followed Bill and Gary further into the factory, his eyes wide with curiosity as he took in the intricate processes involved in creating the burial vaults. With each step, he could feel the haunted store fading behind him, like a distant dream, one that was gradually being replaced with a newfound sense of purpose and belonging. The sound of machinery hummed in the background as Bill led Patrick into his office, a small but organized space tucked away from the main factory floor. Sunlight streamed through the dusty window, casting long shadows across the room. "Let's talk logistics," Bill said, motioning for Patrick to take a seat across from him at the cluttered desk. He picked up a stack of papers, flipping through them until he found the one he was looking for. "First things first, when would you like to start? We can be flexible with the schedule, but I'd like to get you on board as soon as possible." "Actually, I'm ready to start right away," Patrick replied, feeling his heart race with anticipation. He didn't want to waste any time leaving the haunted store behind, not when he had such an exciting opportunity before him. "I could start tomorrow." "Excellent," Bill nodded, scribbling something down on the paper. "We'll get you started tomorrow then. That way we can make sure you're fully trained and comfortable before we throw you into the deep end." "Sounds good to me," Patrick agreed, his mind already racing ahead to imagine himself in the role. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was eager to prove himself and learn everything there was to know about the funeral industry. "Now, as for paperwork," Bill continued, handing Patrick a few forms. "You'll need to fill these out before your first day. They're just standard employment documents, I-9s and W-2s and direct deposit forms, nothing too complicated. Once you've completed them, give them to your supervisor and we'll get you set up in the system." "Got it," Patrick said, taking the papers and scanning them quickly. It all seemed straightforward enough, a far cry from the mysterious happenings that had plagued him at the store. "Any questions?" Bill asked, leaning back in his chair and fixing Patrick with a steady gaze. "None at the moment," Patrick replied, feeling grateful for Bill's thoroughness. He knew that he was in good hands here, not just with Bill, but with Gary as well. "All right, then," Bill said, standing up and extending his hand. "Welcome to the team, Patrick. I have a feeling you're going to fit in just fine around here." "Thank you," Patrick responded, shaking the older man's hand firmly. He couldn't help but feel a surge of hope and determination course through him. This was the fresh start he'd been longing for, and he was ready to embrace it with open arms. "Tomorrow I'm going to set you up with our cemetery site supervisor. His name is Dave. I think you'll make a perfect fit working with him instead of inside this plant. He just had a guy quit recently, and he needs the help. If you're willing to work with him, that job comes with an extra $2 an hour." "Yes, sir," Patrick said. "I'm more than willing." "Good. Just give him your paperwork tomorrow, and he'll take care of it for you. Meet him at Shady Acres Cemetery at 7 a.m. Sounds good, sir. Thank you again for this opportunity. As he left the office, paperwork tucked securely under his arm, Patrick felt a new sense of purpose settle over him. Gone were the shadows of the haunted store. In their place was a bright future filled with possibility and the promise of hard-earned success. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them head-on, confident in the knowledge that he had a strong support system behind him. Patrick stood at the entrance of the cemetery, his breath visible in the crisp autumn air. His new life as a gravedigger was about to begin, leaving behind his past as a warehouse assembly maintenance technician. He glanced around, taking in the rows of headstones that stretched out before him like an eerie sea of granite and marble. The thought of working amidst the dead sent a shiver down his spine, but he shook it off, determined to prove himself in this new line of work. "Hey, you must be Patrick," said a gruff voice from behind him. Patrick turned to see a man in his early 50s with a head of black hair that was starting to be consumed by gray, and a thick beard with a muscular build approaching. This was Dave, or Dad as everyone called him, his new boss at the cemetery. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was a warmth in his eyes that put Patrick at ease. "Yep, that's me," Patrick responded, extending a hand. "Welcome to the crew," Dave said, shaking Patrick's hand firmly. "I've heard good things about your work ethic, and I'm glad to have you on board." There was a genuine sincerity in his tone that made Patrick feel valued. "Thanks. I'm excited to get started," Patrick replied, trying to sound confident despite the fluttering nerves in his stomach. "Good," Dave nodded, patting Patrick on the back. "Let me show you the ropes." As they walked through the cemetery, Patrick couldn't help but admire the way Dave carried himself. He had an air of authority and experience that spoke of years spent in this peculiar profession. Patrick felt a growing sense of trust towards Dave, eager to learn from him and become a skilled gravedigger himself. "Listen, kid," Dave said, pausing beside a freshly dug grave. "This job isn't for everyone. You'll see some strange things here, and you'll need to keep your wits about you. But if you can handle that, I think you'll do just fine." "Strange things?" Patrick asked, curiosity piqued. "Tell you what," Dave replied, a mysterious glint in his eyes. "You stick around long enough, and you're bound to find out for yourself." "First thing you need to know is the layout of the cemetery," Dave explained as they walked between rows of ancient headstones. Patrick's eyes scanned the landscape, taking in the different sections and memorizing their locations. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Your main duties here are digging graves, preparing burial sites, and setting up for funeral services. We'll start with the basics today and work our way up from there," Dave continued, guiding Patrick to an open plot of land. "All right, let's start with the shovel," Dave said, handing one to Patrick. "When digging a grave, make sure to create a clean outline first. You'll want to measure out the dimensions and mark them with stakes." "Got it," Patrick replied, gripping the shovel handle, feeling its cool metal against his palm. He focused on every detail, determined to prove he was capable of handling this job. As he measured out the dimensions of the grave, he could feel the sweat beginning to form at the base of his neck. "Good. Now start digging," Dave instructed. Patrick plunged the shovel into the earth, muscles straining as he lifted piles of dirt and placed them neatly beside the hole. The rhythmic sound of metal striking soil rang through the air, accompanied by Patrick's labored breaths. "Take breaks when you need to," Dave advised, watching Patrick closely. "You don't want to wear yourself out too soon." "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind," Patrick responded, pausing for a moment to catch his breath. While he had always been physically fit, this work required a different kind of stamina. His thoughts wandered to his previous job, where he had never faced challenges quite like these. But he was determined to adapt and thrive in his new role. "Once you get the hang of the shovel, we'll move on to the excavator," Dave said, gesturing towards the large piece of equipment parked nearby. "It takes some practice, but you'll get it eventually." "Looking forward to it," Patrick replied, trying to sound enthusiastic despite his growing fatigue. "Lastly, we have the funeral services themselves," Dave explained as they walked towards a storage shed filled with tents, chairs, and other equipment. "We need to set up tents for the family and friends of the deceased. arrange chairs, and sometimes even help direct traffic during the service. It's all part of the job. Understood, Patrick said, taking in the array of tools and materials before him. He knew he had a lot to learn, but was eager to prove himself. As he followed Dave back to the grave they were digging, Patrick couldn't help but think about the strange things his mentor had mentioned earlier. A shiver ran down his spine, but he shook off the feeling, focusing instead on the work at hand. The sun began its slow descent, casting an orange glow across the graveyard. Rows of headstones stood like silent guardians among the well-tended plots, some adorned with wilting flowers and flickering candles. The air was heavy with the scent of freshly dug earth and damp grass, while the encroaching woods seemed to hold their breath, adding to the quiet stillness that enveloped the area. "Almost done for the day," Dave called out as Patrick continued digging, his shovel slicing through the soil with practiced ease. "Yup, just a little more," Patrick replied, pausing to wipe the sweat from his brow. He glanced around at the solemn beauty of the graveyard, feeling both humbled and slightly unnerved by the weight of so many departed souls resting nearby. As he resumed his work, Patrick couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It was a subtle, prickling sensation on the back of his neck, causing him to glance over his shoulder every now and then. The surrounding trees loomed ominously, their gnarled branches casting long shadows that danced in the fading light. "Something bothering you?" Dave asked, noticing Patrick's uneasy glances. "Feels like I'm being watched," Patrick admitted, forcing a chuckle to mask his unease. "Probably just my imagination playing tricks on me." "Could be," Dave agreed nonchalantly, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. Patrick focused on the task at hand, trying to push aside his growing sense of unease. He felt foolish for letting his nerves get the better of him, especially when he had so much to learn from Dave. As he shoveled another mound of dirt, he silently admonished himself for giving in to childish fears. And then it happened. "Patrick." The whisper was barely audible, yet it seemed to echo in his ears, causing him to freeze mid-motion. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a brief moment he couldn't even draw breath. The voice sounded like it was coming from just behind him, yet when he turned to look, there was no one there. Did you hear that?" Patrick stammered, his eyes wide with fear as they darted around the graveyard. "Hear what?" Dave asked, frowning slightly as he observed Patrick's sudden distress. "Someone called my name," he whispered, his grip tightening on the shovel handle. "I swear, I heard someone say Patrick." Dave studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "This place can play tricks on your mind, especially when the light starts to fade. Let's finish up and head home, all right?" Yeah," Patrick agreed, swallowing hard as he forced himself to resume digging. He tried to convince himself that what he'd heard was just a figment of his imagination, a byproduct of the eerie atmosphere and his own overactive mind. But deep down he knew the truth. Something was happening in this graveyard, something that defied explanation. And Patrick couldn't help but wonder if he'd somehow stumbled into a world far more mysterious and terrifying than he could have ever imagined. Patrick's hands trembled as he gripped the shovel, feeling the cold sweat forming on his forehead. His heart raced with a mix of fear and confusion as he tried to focus on digging the grave. The whispery voice that had called his name played over and over in his mind, making it impossible for him to shake off the unsettling feeling. Taking a deep breath to steady himself. As he returned to his work, he couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. Dave's words provided some comfort, but they didn't completely erase the inexplicable fear that had settled in the pit of his stomach. I must be imagining things, Patrick thought, trying to convince himself that what he'd experienced was nothing more than a trick of the mind. This place is just getting to me. Determined to prove to both Dave and himself that he could handle whatever strange occurrences the graveyard might throw at him. Patrick focused on his task, the rhythmic motion of his shovel cutting through the earth providing a sense of grounding amidst the eerie atmosphere. "Good work, Patrick," Dave said after a while, smiling approvingly at the progress they'd made. "You're getting the hang of this quickly. We'll be done in no time." "Thanks, Dave," Patrick replied, managing a weak smile as he fought to push the unsettling whispers from his thoughts. As they continued to dig, side by side, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the rows of headstones. Despite the growing darkness, Patrick felt a sense of camaraderie with his new mentor that helped to keep his fears at bay. But as the day turned to night, and the chilling air grew heavier, Patrick knew that the strange occurrences in the graveyard were far from over. The sun had long set, and the graveyard was bathed in a ghostly moonlight that seeped through the gnarled branches of the surrounding trees. Patrick's breath billowed like smoke in the cold air as he worked alongside Dave, determined to finish preparing the burial site despite the eerie atmosphere and his lingering fears. "Almost there," grunted Patrick, his shovel cutting into the earth with renewed vigor. He couldn't shake the curiosity that had taken root in his mind, but he refused to let it distract him from the task at hand. "I won't let the supernatural keep me from doing my job," he thought defiantly. "Right," Dave agreed, stepping back to survey their progress. "Just a few more feet and we'll be done." As they resumed digging, a cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead, casting erratic shadows that danced across the ground like restless spirits. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, Patrick caught a glimpse of movement. Startled, he turned his head, only to find himself staring at 6 black figures standing silently beside him. Their faces were obscured by the darkness, but he could feel their eyes boring into him, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Dave," he gasped, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. "Do you see them?" "See who?" Dave, looking puzzled, scanned the area where Patrick was pointing. Those figures," whispered Patrick, his voice shaking with disbelief. Dave squinted into the darkness, then shook his head. "I don't see anything, Patrick. But if you do, well, that's not entirely surprising." What do you mean?" Patrick stammered, unable to tear his gaze away from the mysterious figures. "Graveyards attract all sorts of energies," Dave explained, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Some folks are more sensitive to them than others. It's possible that you're picking up on something I can't see." Are they dangerous?" Patrick asked, his mind racing with questions and fear. "No, son. Pay them no mind, everything's fine," Dave said. "Okay, I'll take your word on that," Patrick muttered, swallowing hard as he forced himself to return to his work. And though the 6 black figures remained at the edge of his vision, silent and unmoving, Patrick continued to dig, each thrust of his shovel a testament to his unwavering resolve. The 6 black figures stood like statues, their eerie presence feeling both alien and strangely familiar to Patrick. He stared at them with wide-eyed disbelief, his heart pounding in his chest as if it were trying to escape. His lips trembled uncontrollably, and a cold sweat broke out across his brow. But Patrick couldn't tear his eyes away from the spectral figures. The urge to run surged through him, a primal force gripping his limbs tightly. But he knew that running would be a sign of weakness, an admission of defeat. If he was going to survive this graveyard and learn its secrets, he had to face these otherworldly beings head-on. With a deep breath, Patrick forced his feet to remain rooted to the ground, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee. He lifted his shovel and resumed digging, sending clumps of dirt flying as he tried to ignore the silent watchers. "Good man," Dave murmured, giving Patrick's shoulder a reassuring pat. "We'll finish up here, then head back to the office. Tomorrow we can talk more about what you've seen." As they continued working, Patrick's mind raced with questions and theories. What were these shadowy figures? Why did they seem drawn to him? And what could Dave tell him about the strange happenings in this graveyard? In time, the sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rows of headstones. Patrick felt the chill of night settling around him, but with each passing minute, he also felt a growing sense of excitement. The graveyard held secrets, and he was determined to uncover them. Finally, as the last beam of sunlight disappeared and the darkness became complete, Patrick and Dave completed their work. The grave was dug, the burial site prepared, and the eerie figures had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. "All right, let's head back," Dave said gruffly, nodding in approval at Patrick's resolve. "We'll talk more about this tomorrow." As they walked away from the site, leaving the silent graveyard behind, Patrick couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and anticipation. He knew deep down that he was now a part of something much bigger than himself. And despite the terror lurking within the shadows, he felt alive in a way he never had before. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Patrick stood, shovel in hand, taking a moment to wipe the sweat from his brow. His muscles ached from digging graves all day, and as the last rays of sunlight disappeared, an icy chill crept through the air. The familiar unease returned, settling deep into his bones. Dave, his boss, approached from behind, crunching leaves underfoot. "You're doing good work, son," he said gruffly, giving Patrick's shoulder a firm pat. "But there's something I gotta tell you before we call it a night." Patrick turned to face Dave, curiosity mixed with apprehension. "What is it, boss?" "Look, I ain't one for superstition or nonsense, but this place, it's different." Dave rubbed his thick beard thoughtfully. "Every worker I've ever had's seen something strange here. Shadows that shouldn't be there. Whispers on the wind when no one's around. Hell, some have even claimed to see figures walking among the tombstones after dark." "Seriously?" Patrick asked, trying to hide his fear. As much as he hated to admit it, he'd sensed something was off about the cemetery since he started working there. "Dead serious," Dave replied, a somber look in his eyes. "Half my crew quit on the spot, too scared to come back. But not you, Patrick. You've stuck around, even though I know you felt it too." Patrick swallowed hard, remembering the eerie sensations he'd experienced while working late. He couldn't deny the truth any longer. "Yeah, I have. But I'm not going to let some creepy feelings chase me away. I want to find out what's really going on here." Dave nodded, respect etched on his face. "You got guts, kid. I'll give you that, but be careful. This place can play tricks on your mind, make you question everything you know." "Thanks for the warning," Patrick said, his determination unwavering. "But I need to see this through." "All right," Dave sighed, resigned. "Just remember, you ain't alone in this. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Now let's get out of here before it gets any darker." As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Patrick couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was following them from the shadows. But he refused to show fear. He had made up his mind. Whatever haunted these grounds would not remain a mystery much longer. That night, after his shift, Patrick sat in his car at the cemetery entrance. He called Natalie from the store and told her about the things going on at the cemetery. He told her the things Dave, his new boss, told him. Natalie said she has a friend named Maggie, who is a very educated researcher, and she could help with researching about the history of the cemetery. So Patrick asked if she and Maggie could meet him there in an hour. Since it was Friday, Patrick was hoping they would help him investigate the supernatural occurrences at the cemetery that night. As he waited, he couldn't help but feel an eerie sensation settle over the seemingly peaceful place. About an hour later, he heard a voice. "Hey, Patrick," Natalie called out as she approached with Maggie by her side. Her long blonde hair caught the last rays of sunlight, giving her an ethereal glow. "What's up? You sounded pretty serious on the phone." "Hi, guys," Patrick replied, his voice tense. "You must be Maggie. It's nice to meet you." "Likewise," she said. "Thanks for coming. I have something important to tell you." Maggie studied his face, her piercing green eyes full of concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What's going on?" Patrick hesitated, wondering if he should burden them with what he had learned. But he knew he needed their support, and they deserved to know the truth. Taking a deep breath, he told them about the supernatural encounters he and his coworkers had experienced at the cemetery. Figures lurking in the shadows, strange noises echoing through the night, and the unshakable feeling that something otherworldly was watching them. "Wow," Natalie breathed, her blue eyes wide with surprise. "I knew you were working late, but I had no idea you were dealing with this. Is it worse than the store?" "Yes, it's far worse if you ask me," Patrick said. Maggie, ever the historian, furrowed her brow in thought. "There must be some explanation for these occurrences. Maybe something happened here in the past that we don't know about." "Exactly," Patrick agreed, looking at both of them. "That's why I need your help. I can't do this alone." Natalie took his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "Of course we'll help you, Patrick. You're not alone in this." "Right," Maggie chimed in, her curiosity piqued. "I've been researching this cemetery's history for years, and I've always felt there was something more to uncover. Now's our chance." "Thank you," Patrick whispered, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I knew I could count on you both." "All right then," Natalie said with determination. Let's get started. We'll need to gather information, visit the local archives, and maybe even talk to some of the former workers who experienced these supernatural events themselves. Sounds like a plan, Maggie agreed, her eyes alight with excitement. We'll get to the bottom of this mystery, no matter what it takes. As the three friends stood together, united in their quest, they couldn't foresee the dark path that lay ahead. But one thing was certain. They were in this together, and nothing would stand in their way. Let's do this, Patrick said, steeling himself for the unknown. We're going to find out the truth about this place, no matter how terrifying it may be. And as the last light of day vanished completely, the shadows around them seemed to grow darker and more menacing than ever before. The next morning's sun cast long shadows across the small, unkempt yard of Jared Simmons' home. Patrick took in the sight of the dilapidated house with a mixture of trepidation and determination. He knew that speaking to Jared was crucial for their investigation, but there was an undeniable sense of foreboding lingering in the air. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Natalie whispered, her voice wavering slightly as she glanced at the paint-chipped porch, its wooden boards creaking under the weight of an old rocking chair. "According to Dave, this is where Jared lives," Maggie confirmed, consulting the scrap of paper she'd scribbled the address on. "He hasn't had any contact with the cemetery since he left, so we'll have to tread carefully." Patrick nodded, steeling himself before taking the lead up the cracked concrete path. With each step, his mind raced with thoughts of what they might learn from Jared, whose abrupt departure from the cemetery still haunted those who worked there. As they reached the front door, Patrick raised a hand to knock, hesitating for just a moment before letting his knuckles rap against the wood. "Who's there?" a hesitant voice called from inside, betraying a sense of unease that mirrored Patrick's own feelings. "Jared, it's Patrick. I work at the cemetery now," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm here with two friends. We'd like to talk to you about your experiences there." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door swung open, revealing a man in his late 20s with short, messy black hair and a slim build. His eyes darted nervously between the three visitors, as if trying to gauge their intentions. "All right," Jared said quietly, stepping back to let them in. "But make it quick." As they followed him into the dimly lit living room, Patrick noticed that the walls were lined with shelves of books on the paranormal and occult. It was clear that Jared hadn't been able to let go of his past experiences at the cemetery. "Jared, we've been experiencing some strange occurrences at the cemetery," Patrick began cautiously, watching as Jared's eyes widened in recognition. "We believe they're supernatural in nature. We'd hoped you could shed some light on what you saw when you worked there." Jared swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't like talking about it," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "But I can tell you this. Whatever's happening at that cemetery is beyond anything any of us can understand." "Please, Jared," Natalie implored, her blue eyes shining with sincerity. "We just want to help. We want to understand what's going on so we can put a stop to it. Or at least protect ourselves and others from it," Maggie added, her historian instincts driving her to uncover the truth behind the dark events unfolding at the cemetery. Jared hesitated for a moment, seemingly torn between his desire to forget the past and the need to share his knowledge. Finally, he sighed and nodded. "All right," he murmured, "but I warn you, once you know what's really going on, there's no turning back." As the three friends exchanged nervous glances, they couldn't help but feel the weight of their decision. But they knew that uncovering the truth was vital, and they would face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Jared stared at the three expectant faces before him, his hands trembling slightly. He took a deep breath and shook his head, eyes filled with fear. "Look, I can't help you," he said firmly, voice wavering. "You don't understand what you're getting into. I've tried to forget it all, but the memories still haunt me. Whatever is happening at that cemetery, it's not something we can control or stop." Patrick clenched his fists, frustration bubbling within him. "But we have to try, Jared. We can't just ignore it and hope it goes away." "Patrick's right," Natalie chimed in, her blue eyes filled with determination. "We need to find out what's going on and put an end to it. With your knowledge, we might be able to figure this out. Or get ourselves killed in the process," Jared shot back, his face pale. "I barely made it out of there alive, and I'm not going back. Neither should any of you." Maggie leaned forward, her green eyes probing. "Is that why you quit so suddenly without giving any explanation? Too afraid to face the truth?" "Enough," Jared snapped, visibly shaken. "Stay away from that godforsaken place. You don't know what you're dealing with." The room fell silent as Jared's words hung heavy in the air. Patrick exchanged glances with Natalie and Maggie, his mind racing with thoughts and plans. Despite Jared's warning, the desire to uncover the truth only grew stronger within him. "Fine," Patrick said, finally standing up. "If you won't help us, we'll do this without you. But if you change your mind, you know where to find us." He motioned for Natalie and Maggie to follow him. As they stepped outside Jared's house, closing the door behind them, a chill ran down Patrick's spine. He knew they were taking a risk by investigating the supernatural occurrences at the cemetery, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. "Are you sure about this, Patrick?" Natalie asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. "Maybe Jared is right, and we should stay away." "Jared may be scared, but we can't let fear control us," Patrick replied, his voice firm. "We need to get to the bottom of this, for our own safety and for those who've been affected." Maggie nodded in agreement. "Let's do some research, gather information, and come up with a plan. We'll face this together, whatever it takes." As they walked away from Jared's house, the shadows growing longer around them, Patrick couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Their journey into the unknown had only just begun, and they had no idea what horrors awaited them. But one thing was certain. They would face it head-on, united in their determination to uncover the truth. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the cemetery as Patrick, Natalie, and Maggie stood near the entrance, steeling themselves for the investigation ahead. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, while a chill wind whispered through the branches of an ancient oak tree. "Okay," Patrick began, rubbing his hands together nervously. "We know people have reported seeing ghostly figures wandering the grounds at night. Jared said he saw a woman in a black morning gown, her face hidden beneath a veil." Natalie shivered, her eyes darting around the shadowy landscape. "Yeah, and I heard from Connie that one of the groundskeepers swears he heard a baby crying near the mausoleum, even though there were no infants buried there recently." Maggie chimed in, her voice steady despite the goosebumps on her arms. "And let's not forget the smell of roses near the old chapel, even in winter. People say it's the ghost of a young bride who died before her wedding day." As they recounted these stories, the atmosphere grew increasingly unsettling. The wind seemed to carry faint whispers, and the shadows appeared to shift and twist like living things. Patrick couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Is there anything else you experienced here?" Maggie asked, her green eyes reflecting the fear she tried to hide. Patrick hesitated, recalling a night when he'd been working late at the cemetery. He remembered the sensation of cold fingers trailing down his spine, and a disembodied voice whispering his name in the darkness. I might have. It's hard to be sure, but something definitely felt off." The cemetery seemed to close in on them as they shared their experiences, each revelation adding another layer of dread to the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened, as if the very night was drawing strength from their fear. "All right then," Patrick said, swallowing hard. "We know something's going on here, and we need to find out what it is. Let's stick together, keep our eyes and ears open, and see what we can uncover." With determination etched on their faces, Patrick, Natalie, and Maggie ventured into the heart of the cemetery, the darkness swallowing them whole. The whispers grew louder, and unseen eyes seemed to follow their every move. But they pressed onward, driven by their desire for answers and the hope that they could put an end to the haunting specters that plagued the grounds. Huddled together under the moon's dim light, Patrick, Natalie, and Maggie discussed their plan of action. The frigid air wrapped around them like a shroud, and the cemetery's twisted shadows seemed to be listening in on their conversation. "First things first," Patrick said, his breath visible in the cold night air. "We need to gather more information about whatever is haunting this place. We'll split up and examine different areas of the cemetery. Nat, you take the old mausoleum. Mags, You focus on the newer graves by the west end. I'll investigate the crypt near the center." "Are you sure about splitting up?" Natalie asked, her voice quivering with apprehension. "That seems dangerous." "Jared warned us not to meddle with these forces, but we have to find out what's going on," Patrick replied, determination burning in his eyes. "If we stick together, we might miss something crucial. Just remember to keep your walkie-talkies close and call for backup if anything happens." "All right, let's do this," Maggie agreed, her voice steadier than before, though her hands still trembled slightly as she clutched her flashlight. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Patrick glanced at his friends, their faces illuminated by the pale moonlight. "Stay safe, you two. And remember, no matter what, don't let fear control you. We're in this together." The trio nodded, their resolve strengthened by Patrick's words. They ventured into the darkness, each following their designated path, their senses heightened as they searched for clues. Deep within the cemetery, the air grew colder still, and an eerie silence fell upon the grounds. Each footstep echoed through the night, and shadows seemed to shift and dance among the tombstones. The scent of damp earth mingled with the faint aroma of decaying flowers, intensifying the foreboding atmosphere. Patrick's heart raced in his chest as he approached the crypt. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Natalie and Maggie must have felt it too. Their thoughts and fears radiated through the silence that crackled between them. What if Jared was right? What if they were meddling with forces beyond their understanding? He shook off the doubts gnawing at the edges of his mind, focusing on the task at hand. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The truth awaited them, hidden within the darkness, and they would uncover it, together. The group found nothing of significance that night, so they decided to leave and meet up the next day at the local library. It was pretty vacant for a Saturday morning, but as they researched old news articles, they discovered something horrifying, and the events that took place. Not only was haunting just at the cemetery, it was the town. They discovered the hauntings at the old furniture store were intertwined with the happenings at the cemetery. They also got in touch with a local priest. They obtained some holy water, and they found a book on incantations that might help to confront whatever force they may be facing. They researched what ingredients were used for the rituals they were about to perform. So they went and collected the necessary items. Patrick called Dave and told him about their plan to go investigate the cemetery that night, and about how they met up with Jared, but got little insight on what happened. Dave said, "Are you out of your minds? There's no way you should go around poking demons." Patrick said, "Dave, we are going with or without you, but we need you there. If there's anyone who knows about the things going on there, it's you." Dave gave a sigh in resignation. "Fine, only because you fools are going to get yourselves killed. How could I sleep again knowing I wasn't there to help you?" "Meet me there at midnight," Dave said. The moon hung low over the cemetery, casting eerie shadows upon the tombstones. "Are we really doing this?" Natalie whispered to Patrick, her voice wavering slightly. "We have to," Patrick replied, determination etched on his face. "We need to put an end to whatever is haunting this place." Dave, Patrick's boss, stood beside them. He had seen countless employees come and go due to the strange occurrences at the cemetery, but he remained steadfast in his duty. His no-nonsense personality and fierce loyalty to his employees made him a natural leader for their team. "All right, everyone," Dave said, taking charge. "We're here to stop this entity, whatever it is. Stick together, and we'll get through this." "Let's do this," Maggie said resolutely, clutching a thick, leather-bound book of local history. "I believe we can find the source of this haunting and put an end to it once and for all." The wind picked up, sending a chill down their spines. The cemetery sprawled before them, an unsettling collection of tombstones and mausoleums that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, while the distant hooting of an owl pierced the silence. "Stay close," Dave warned as they ventured deeper into the cemetery. "There's no telling what we might encounter." The group moved cautiously, keeping their eyes peeled for any sign of the malicious entity that had been terrorizing the graveyard. Patrick felt his heart pounding in his chest. His nerves wound tight as they navigated the seemingly endless rows of tombstones. "Did you hear that?" Natalie whispered, her voice trembling. It sounded like someone crying. "Keep moving," Dave urged, his gruff voice betraying a hint of concern. "We need to find the source of this haunting and put an end to it." As they pressed on, the atmosphere grew darker and more oppressive, the weight of the cemetery's history bearing down upon them. But there was no turning back now. They were determined to confront the supernatural force and restore peace to the hallowed grounds. The moon cast eerie shadows as it peeked through the clouds, casting an unsettling glow over the cemetery. Patrick's breath fogged in the chilly air, and he clenched his fists to keep them from shaking. Natalie stayed close behind him, her eyes wide with fear. Maggie clutched a notebook filled with her research on the haunting, while Dave led the group, carrying a shotgun in one hand and a flashlight in the other. "Stay sharp," Dave warned, sweeping the beam of light across the tombstones. "We don't know what form this thing might take." As they ventured deeper into the graveyard, the supernatural encounters intensified. A chilling wail echoed through the night, making Patrick's heart race. He glanced at Natalie, who was visibly shaken. "I don't like this, Patrick," she whispered, her voice quivering. "I know. Neither do I. But we have to," he replied, trying to sound braver than he felt. "We need to stop this thing before it hurts anyone else." By now the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as if something sinister lurked beneath the surface. The once sturdy tombstones appeared to sway menacingly, and the atmosphere grew heavier with each step they took. "All right," Dave said, stopping the group. "It's time to form a plan. We can't just wander around aimlessly. We need to be strategic." "Agreed," Maggie chimed in, flipping through her notebook. "My research suggests that the entity is most active in the oldest section of the cemetery. If we can confront it there, we might have a chance of stopping it." "Okay," Patrick said, taking charge. "Natalie, you and I will head to the oldest section of the cemetery. Dave, you and Maggie should stake out the mausoleum where the entity was last seen. We'll cover more ground that way." "Good plan," Dave said, nodding. "Maggie and I will take the shotgun and some salt. You and Natalie should bring holy water and iron rods. Supposedly it's weak against those elements." "Got it," Patrick replied, grabbing the supplies from Dave's bag. His hands shook as he took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "Remember, we have to stick together," Natalie urged, her voice strained. "We can't let this thing tear us apart." "Let's do this," Patrick said, determination in his eyes. As they split up and ventured further into the darkness, each of them knew that they were not only confronting an evil force, but also facing their own fears. The tension continued to escalate, leaving them on edge and desperate for answers. And though they couldn't predict what lay ahead, they were prepared to face whatever terrors awaited them in the depths of the haunted cemetery. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the cemetery as Patrick and Natalie navigated their way to the oldest section. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Patrick's heart raced, his grip tightening around the iron rod he carried. Natalie clutched the vial of holy water in her hand, her knuckles white. "Look," Natalie whispered, pointing at a worn tombstone partially hidden by overgrown ivy. "That's the grave of Amelia Caldwell. Maggie mentioned her in her research." "Who was she?" Patrick asked, brushing away the ivy to reveal the inscription. "Amelia Caldwell, 1824 to 1856, beloved wife and mother." According to Maggie, Amelia was the wife of a prominent businessman. Their only child died from a fever during an outbreak in the town. Amelia was devastated, but her husband had little time for grief, consumed by his work. Natalie's voice cracked with emotion, as if feeling the weight of Amelia's pain. "Go on," Patrick urged, sensing there was more to the story. Amelia couldn't bear the loneliness and despair. She made a pact with a sinister force, one that promised to reunite her with her child in exchange for something dark. "What did she do?" Patrick asked, his eyes wide with horror. "From what we've gathered, Amelia agreed to offer her soul to this force in return for eternal life and the chance to be with her child. But the entity twisted her wishes. Amelia became trapped in the cemetery, her spirit bound to the grounds, forced to wander aimlessly, searching for her lost child for eternity," Natalie explained, her voice barely audible. "God, that's horrible," Patrick murmured, unable to fathom the depth of Amelia's suffering. Her tragic story is the source of this haunting. We need to confront Amelia and the entity she made the pact with in order to free her spirit and put an end to the torment, Natalie said, determination flashing in her blue eyes. All right, Patrick agreed, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. We'll find a way to break the curse and release Amelia from her suffering. As they advanced further into the cemetery, the wind picked up, and the air grew colder. The rustling of leaves filled their ears as shadows danced around them, taunting them with whispers of the past. They knew that the time had come to face the sinister force lurking within these hallowed grounds, and that only by confronting the darkness would they have a chance at bringing peace to Amelia Caldwell's tormented soul. "Let's do it for Amelia," Patrick whispered, his fear momentarily eclipsed by a newfound resolve. "Agreed," Natalie replied, her grip on the vial of holy water tightening, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The cold wind intensified as Patrick, Natalie, Maggie, and Dave marched deeper into the graveyard. Each step they took was a battle against fear, but their determination to confront the malevolent force and save Amelia Caldwell's soul kept them going. As they approached the heart of the cemetery, an eerie fog began to creep in around them. The mist seemed to materialize from the very ground itself, enveloping the group with its thick, unnatural presence. It was a sickly shade of green, casting a ghastly pallor over everything it touched. "Stay close," Patrick warned, his voice strained with anxiety. "We can't lose each other in this fog." But despite their best efforts, the fog continued to thicken and swirl around them, making it increasingly difficult to maintain visibility. Their flashlight beams were swallowed by the haze, providing little comfort or guidance in the oppressive murk. "Patrick!" Natalie cried out as the fog separated her from the others. Her fear was palpable, mixing with the chill in the air. "Stay calm, Nat. We'll find each other," Patrick shouted back, reaching out into the void in a desperate attempt to grasp her hand. "Dave, Maggie," he called, hoping to locate the others. But there was no response, only the whispers of the wind and the disquieting rustle of leaves. Patrick's heart raced as he stumbled blindly through the fog, his mind filled with dread. He feared that if they didn't reunite soon, they would be left vulnerable to the sinister force that haunted these grounds. Natalie's thoughts were consumed by the tragic story of Amelia Caldwell and the fate that had befallen her own child. As a mother herself, she couldn't help but empathize with Amelia's pain, and it only fueled her resolve to free the tormented spirit. She clutched the vial of holy water tightly in her hand, determined to put an end to this nightmare. Maggie's curiosity had led her to this haunted cemetery, but now she was faced with the reality of the supernatural. The fog seemed to feed on her fears, disorienting her and making her question her own sanity. But she knew she couldn't allow her fear to consume her. The truth behind the haunting needed to be unveiled. Meanwhile, Dave, the stoic caretaker, grappled with a sense of responsibility for the group. He had seen many come and go due to the eerie occurrences at the cemetery, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing Patrick and the others to the same fate. He fought through the fog with fierce determination, driven by a protective instinct that refused to be stifled. "Guys!" Maggie yelled, her voice barely audible through the dense fog. "I can't see anything! Where are you?" "Keep talking," Patrick urged. "We'll follow your voice." The four friends continued to struggle through the fog, each battling their own fears and challenges, striving to reunite and face the force that threatened not only Amelia Caldwell's spirit, but their very lives. With every step, they hoped against hope that they would find one another and put an end to this darkness once and for all. The fog swirled around Patrick like a sinister embrace, its gray tendrils clawing at his face and obscuring his vision. He stumbled forward, arms outstretched, desperate to find any sign of the others. "Dave, Natalie, Maggie," he shouted, his voice muffled by the unnatural thickness of the fog. The air was heavy and oppressive, making it difficult to breathe. A cold sweat broke out on Patrick's brow as panic set in. "Patrick!" came Dave's gruff voice from somewhere nearby, followed by a loud crash. Patrick turned towards the sound and saw Dave emerge from the fog, his muscular form looking more vulnerable than ever before. They exchanged a brief nod of relief before the urgency of their situation returned. "Where are the girls?" Dave asked, his voice strained with concern. "I don't know," Patrick admitted, choking back his fear. "We have to find them." Together they pushed through the fog, calling out for Natalie and Maggie. The eerie silence that greeted them only served to heighten their anxiety. Time seemed to slow down, every second stretching into an eternity as they searched. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the fog, followed by the unmistakable sound of something being dragged away. Patrick felt his heart drop like a stone in his chest. It was Natalie's voice. "No!" Patrick yelled, sprinting in the direction of the scream. Dave was hot on his heels, his protective instincts kicking into overdrive. They arrived at the scene just in time to see the ghastly apparition of Amelia Caldwell hovering above the ground, her spectral fingers digging into Natalie's shoulder. Beside her, Maggie struggled against the grasp of another sinister spirit. Both women looked terrified, their faces twisted in pain. "Let them go!" Patrick roared, grabbing a nearby iron rod that he had brought along as a makeshift weapon. He swung it at the ghostly figure, but it passed straight through her, sending a chill down his spine. "Damn it!" Dave cursed, clenching his fists in frustration. "We need to find another way to fight them." As they watched helplessly, Amelia and the other spirit dragged Natalie and Maggie deeper into the fog, their screams growing fainter until they were swallowed by the silence. Patrick's mind raced, adrenaline giving way to despair. They had come to confront the supernatural force haunting the cemetery, but now they were completely out of their depth, left alone in the fog with no idea how to save their friends. "Dave," Patrick said, his voice trembling, "what are we going to do?" Dave looked at him, his eyes filled with uncertainty as he searched for an answer. It was clear that their plan had gone horribly wrong, and now they were facing the nightmare they had tried to prevent. "First," Dave said, his voice resolute despite the fear that gripped him, "we find the heart of this evil, and then we destroy it." With that, they ventured deeper into the fog, driven by their desperation to save Natalie and Maggie, and determined to face whatever horrors awaited them. As Patrick and Dave trudged through the dense fog, it seemed as if the cemetery was endless. The eerie silence was broken only by their labored breathing and the distant cries of crows. The weight of their failure bore down on them, and Patrick couldn't shake the feeling that they'd never see Natalie or Maggie again. "Dave," Patrick muttered, his voice barely audible. "What if we can't save them? What if this thing is too powerful?" Dave's eyes flicked to Patrick, the resolve in his gaze wavering for a moment. "We have to try, Patrick. We can't just abandon them." Patrick stared at the ground, his mind racing with doubts. He had thought he could face the supernatural force head-on, but now he realized how foolish he'd been. What chance did they stand against such an entity? "Listen," Dave said, gripping Patrick's shoulder. "I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared too. But we've come this far, and we can't give up now. We'll find a way to save them. We have to." Patrick swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic in his chest. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. "All right," he said, determination creeping into his voice. "Let's keep moving." The fog grew thicker around them, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. As they continued, they stumbled upon a dilapidated crypt with a rusted iron gate hanging open. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, and an inexplicable chill seeped into their bones. "Maybe there's something in here that can help us," Patrick suggested, his voice wavering. "Or maybe it's a trap," Dave countered, his eyes scanning the dark interior. "Either way," Patrick said, steeling himself, "we have to try." As they crossed the threshold into the crypt, a sudden gust of wind slammed the gate shut behind them, the sound echoing through the darkness. Their hearts raced, panic clawing at their throats as they realized they were trapped. "Dave," Patrick whispered, his voice trembling. "What do we do now?" "Stay calm," Dave replied, though he sounded anything but. "We'll find a way out of this, we always do." But as they fumbled in the darkness, searching for an exit, a deep, sinister laughter echoed through the crypt, sending shivers down their spines. "Who's there?" Patrick demanded, trying to mask his fear. "Your worst nightmare," came the chilling response, followed by another bout of haunting laughter. "Show yourself!" Dave shouted, brandishing a flashlight like a weapon. "Patience, my friends," the voice taunted. "You'll see me soon enough." And with that, the laughter ceased, leaving Patrick and Dave alone in the darkness, the fate of Natalie and Maggie hanging in the balance. "Dave," Patrick said, his voice barely a whisper. "What are we going to do?" "Whatever it takes," Dave replied grimly. "Whatever it takes." And as quick as it happened, the fog lifted and the entity was gone, along with the girls. Patrick and Dave feeling defeated but eager and willing to continue fighting. The only way forward is through the crypt. The crypt door loomed before them like a gaping maw, daring them to enter. Patrick could feel the cold tendrils of fear snake their way up his spine, but he refused to let it paralyze him. He glanced at Dave, whose stony expression betrayed none of the apprehension that Patrick felt. "Ready?" Dave asked gruffly, gripping the iron handle of an old makeshift torch they had prepared earlier. The flame cast flickering shadows against the crumbling walls of the crypt. "Ready," Patrick replied, taking a deep breath as he grabbed the flashlight from his pocket and switched it on. Together they pushed open the crypt door, revealing a dark, musty chamber. "Over there," Patrick whispered, shining the beam of his flashlight towards two figures huddled in the far corner of the crypt. Natalie's tear-streaked face looked up at them with relief, while Maggie clutched her notebook protectively. They were both bound and gagged, but alive. "Thank God," Dave muttered as he rushed forward, working quickly to untie the pair. "Are you two all right?" Yeah," Natalie stammered, rubbing her wrists once she was freed. "But we need to hurry. We saw it, the thing that's haunting this place." "Right," Patrick said, his heart pounding at the thought of facing the evil force. "We've got a plan. There's power in numbers, and if we work together, we can weaken it." Maggie nodded fervently, her eyes alight with determination. "I found some incantations in my research. They should help us." "Let's do it then," Dave said, handing Natalie the torch. "Stay close, everyone." As they made their way out of the crypt and back into the moonlit cemetery, the air seemed to thicken around them. A low, ominous growl echoed in the distance, sending shivers down their spines. "Get ready," Patrick whispered, his grip tightening around the flashlight. "It's coming." Suddenly, a dark, shadowy figure lunged at them from behind a tombstone. Dave swung the torch, the flames licking at the entity as it recoiled with an unearthly screech. Natalie held her ground, reciting a spell she had found in Maggie's notes. "Per lumina spiritus divincimus," she bellowed, her voice surprisingly strong despite her fear. The sinister force seemed to weaken under the combined assault of fire and words, its form flickering between darkness and light. "Keep going," Patrick encouraged, focusing his own energy on maintaining the beam of his flashlight, which seemed to be draining unnaturally fast. "Ad lutem," Maggie joined in, her voice ringing out alongside Natalie's. "Ad libertatem." The air crackled with energy as the incantations continued, the spirits trapped within the cemetery beginning to stir. Ghostly figures emerged from the shadows, drawn towards the group by the power of the spells. "Help us," they whispered, their voices a chorus of desperation and hope. "Free us." "Stay strong, everyone," Patrick urged, his heart pounding with a mix of terror and exhilaration. "We can do this." As the group chanted louder and more forcefully, the force began to dissipate, its grip on the trapped spirits weakening. One by one, the spirits broke free of their chains, soaring upwards into the night sky with expressions of gratitude and relief. "Thank you," they whispered as they vanished, leaving the cemetery filled with a newfound sense of peace. Amelia Caldwell was reunited with her long-lost child. She gave the group a knowing smile and a sincere thank you, as she too vanished with her child. Did we do it?" Natalie asked, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I think we did," Patrick replied, his voice thick with emotion. He looked around at the small group, tired, battered but victorious, and felt a surge of pride. They had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger for it. "Let's get out of here," Dave said, his gruff exterior cracking to reveal a hint of a smile. "I think we all deserve a break." The cemetery loomed before them, shrouded in an unnatural darkness that sent chills down their spines. They knew the battle was far from over. The evil spirit still clung to the land, desperate for power. "All right," Patrick said, his voice a low growl. "We've weakened it, but we still need to finish it off for good. Maggie, you mentioned something about a specific ritual that could banish it?" Maggie nodded, her green eyes alight with determination. "Yes, but it's risky. We'll need to work together as a team and trust each other completely." Trust echoed in the minds of Dave, Natalie, and Patrick. Each had been through so much, yet they knew Maggie was right. It was time to put their faith in one another. "Let's do it," Dave declared, gripping his shovel like a warrior's sword. "Agreed," Natalie added, her blue eyes shining with resolve. "Okay," Patrick said, taking a deep breath. "Maggie, lead the way." As they moved deeper into the cemetery, Maggie instructed them on the steps of the ritual. Each would have a role to play, and they needed to act in unison to ensure success. "Ready?" Maggie asked, her voice filled with both fear and hope. "Ready," the others replied, their voices steady and unwavering. "Then let's begin." They positioned themselves around the heart of the cemetery, where the evil entity pulsed with dark energy. Following Maggie's directions, they began chanting in ancient tongues, summoning the power of light to counteract the darkness. "Focus," Patrick thought, sweat beading on his forehead as he concentrated on his part of the ritual. "We can't afford any mistakes." As the others continued chanting, Patrick approached the epicenter of the dark energy, clutching a vial of purified salt water in his trembling hands. He knew this was the moment that would make or break their efforts. "Here goes nothing," he whispered, and with a deep breath, he hurled the vial into the heart of the darkness. The reaction was instantaneous. The evil spirit screamed in agony as the salt water splashed against it, sizzling and popping as if it were acid. Patrick could feel the entity weaken, its grip on the cemetery loosening. "Keep chanting," Maggie cried, sensing their victory was near. "We're almost there." With renewed vigor, they continued to chant, the bond between them growing stronger with each word. And finally, with a deafening roar, the force shattered into nothingness, banished forever from the land. As silence descended upon the cemetery, the group collapsed to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. "Can you believe it?" Natalie breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "We really did it." "We did," Dave added, a rare smile playing across his bearded face. "Together." Teamwork echoed in Patrick's mind, a lesson he'd never forget. "Never underestimate the power of belief," Maggie said softly, looking around at her newfound friends. "Belief in ourselves and belief in each other." "Here's to believing," Patrick replied, feeling an immense gratitude for the unlikely group that had come together to face the darkness. They had learned so much about themselves and the supernatural world. But one thing stood out above all else. There is strength in unity, and with unwavering belief, even the darkest of forces can be defeated. I'm Mr.Night-Terror, your host, and I thank you for watching and experiencing this story with me. Remember to like and subscribe to my channel, as I will be narrating many more scary stories in the upcoming days. If you have an idea of a story you would like me to narrate, please leave a request and description in the comments. And as always, stay scared, my friends.